This is a story that sounds like it's straight out of a techno thriller. You've got the world's most advanced, supposedly invincible stealth fighter jet, and it gets shot down by a missile system that was basically a museum piece. It was this incredible moment that just shattered the whole myth of self-technology. And today, we're going to break down exactly how it happened.
But here's where it gets really interesting. This quote. Why on earth would the American pilot, moments after punching out of his crippled aircraft, congratulate the guy who just shot him down? Well, the answer reveals a story that's about so much more than just technology and tactics.
All right, let's set the scene. The date is March 27th, 1999. We're right in the middle of the NATO bombing campaign over Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War, and high up in the night sky, a truly legendary aircraft is on a mission. And we're talking about the F-117 Nighthawk, call sign Vega 31. On this particular night, it made history for all the wrong reasons. It became the very first stealth aircraft ever to be shot down in combat. Just like that, the whole aura of complete invincibility that surrounded this technology was gone. So what makes this whole thing so mind-blowing is the sheer mismatch. I mean, this was a true David versus Goliath scenario. You're pitting the absolute pinnacle of American military tech against a system that was decades out of date. So on one side, you've got the F-117 Nighthawk. This is the world's first operational stealth aircraft, right? It was designed with all these special materials and a really unique angular shape, specifically to be invisible to radar. And on the other side, the Yugoslav army is using an S-125 Neva missile system. This thing was a Soviet design from the early 1960s, widely considered outdated and pretty much useless against modern jets, let alone a stealth one. Which, of course, leads to the billion-dollar question. How did a nearly 40-year-old missile system manage to find and destroy a jet that was literally designed to be undetectable? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of three key ingredients. And here they are. It all came down to three things: complacency on NATO's part, a really clever strategy by the Yugoslav forces, and, a healthy dose of pure dumb luck. Let's break each one down. First up, let's talk about complacency. See, NATO had become overconfident. The F-117 had performed so flawlessly in the first Gulf War, flying into downtown Baghdad like it was nothing. And this created this feeling that it just couldn't be touched. And that led to some really critical errors. And we're not talking about small slip-ups here. The F-117s were flying these same predictable routes in and out of Serbia over and over. On that specific night, the EA-6B Prowler jets, the ones designed to jam enemy radar, were grounded because of bad weather. And worst of all, Yugoslav intelligence had reportedly compromised NATO communications. So they knew a strike was coming, they knew the general flight path, and they knew the F-117s would be flying totally exposed without their usual electronic backup. Okay, so that brings us to our second point, strategy. The commander of the Yugoslav missile battery, a guy named Zoltan Dani, he wasn't just sitting around. He and his unit were training relentlessly, figuring out how to adapt their old gear to hunt for this very specific target. And this is where the real genius comes in. Donnie's unit figured out that if they modified their old P-18 radar to operate at its lowest possible frequency, they could get a brief, kind of blurry glimpse of the F-117 when it got within about 15 miles. They also kept their missile launchers on the move, setting up ambushes along those predictable flight paths. And to avoid getting hit by anti-radar missiles themselves, they would only turn on their targeting radar for, get this, 17 seconds at a time. Talk about a tiny window of opportunity.
But here's the crazy part. Even with all this clever preparation, it wasn't really working. They'd already tried this ambush twice before and failed both times. So on the night of March 27th, they get that brief detection from the old radar, they switch on their targeting system, and they see nothing. It looked like another total miss. And that brings us to the final ingredient: pure luck. Just as the Yugoslav crew was about to give up and shut down, the pilot of Vega 31, LT Colonel Dale Zelko, opened his bomb bay doors to drop his payload. For just a few critical seconds, the inside of that bomb bay, which is highly reflective to radar, was exposed. Suddenly, the invisible jet just lights up on their screen from 5 miles away. They fired 2 missiles. The first one missed, but the second one detonated just close enough to send the Nighthawk tumbling out of the sky. So the jet is down. But the story is far from over. In fact, 2 new stories were just beginning.
One was about a pilot on the run, deep behind enemy lines. The other was about the fate of top-secret technology now scattered all over a Serbian field. For 8 terrifying hours, Dale Zelko hid in a freezing cold drainage ditch while shockwaves from other NATO bombs exploded all around him. At one point, Yugoslav search parties with dogs came within 200 meters of his hiding spot. That's it. That's how close he was to being caught, right before an Air Force rescue team swooped in and pulled him to safety. But what about the plane itself? The F-117 crashed relatively intact, and that created an absolute nightmare scenario for the Pentagon. Its most advanced secrets were now just sitting there in enemy hands. A U.S. mission to bomb the wreckage was called off because civilians and news crews had already swarmed the site. And soon after, the real scramble began. It's widely reported that Russian and Chinese agents scoured the area, buying up pieces of the wreckage from local farmers who'd pick them up as souvenirs. And that technology, reverse engineered from the remains of Vega 31, is believed to have directly helped Russia and China develop their own stealth fighter jets. So the geopolitical fallout was huge, right? But believe it or not, the story doesn't end there. In fact, you could say the most remarkable chapter happened more than a decade later, far away from any battlefield. You have to see it from Zoltan Dani's perspective. For him, this was the absolute pinnacle of his career. He and his men had done the impossible. It was a moment of huge professional pride, a national celebration. He was a hero. Well, years later, the pilot, Dale Zelko, and the commander, Zoltan Dani, who by then had retired from the military and opened a bakery, they actually started exchanging letters. This eventually led to them meeting in person in 2011, an event that was captured in a documentary, and the two men who were once mortal enemies became genuine friends. And that brings us full circle, back to that first quote. Zelko's respect for a nice shot, that was the gut instinct of one professional warrior acknowledging another. But after meeting Dani and his family, it became something much deeper. As Zelko put it, you can no longer remove the human element from it. And it's just this powerful reminder that behind every piece of technology, behind every act of war, there are people and families and stories that are always way more complex than we think.
Behind every act of war, there are people and stories far more complex than we ever imagine.